Hello and welcome back, and that is right, it's time for another PS5 SSD test, and today we're going to revisit a subject I've talked about a lot, namely the performance of the Samsung 980 Pro. Now, a number of you that have been following this channel will know that this particular SSD was one of the first that we tested when the storage upgrade function of the PS5 was enabled. However, due to availability and the amount of SSDs in the market, and because of things like Chia and hardware shortages, the only SSD I had amongst my large range of drives was a simple 250 gig drive. And rightly so, a lot of you did highlight, of course, that the performance of the 250 gig is lesser than the bigger ones. And given, as you see here on the screen now, at the moment, the Samsung 980 Pro series is getting quite a lot of hefty discounts online after being available on the market for about a year. A lot of you out there want to see this SSD being tested in a larger capacity. I'm pleased to say for this and another video coming up soon, we're going to be bench testing the 1TB model. We're going to be bench testing a bunch of PS5 exclusive games in this and the next video, and we're going to be taking a deeper look at this SSD. We're even going to reset the benchmark. So as we make our way back into the main screen here, what I'm going to do is go ahead and format this SSD for the first time. And we will talk a little bit about this drive, about the heatsink enabled model arriving in December of 2021. We can see already that the performance benchmark on this is surprisingly low, I've got to say. I did not expect it to be 5585.23, and indeed that is low enough. I think that it is worthy of a revisit. I think what we should do is head back into the storage manager here, and we're going to do a quick retest on that benchmark, because again, I think I owe this SSD that much, that in the previous testing when I've done it with a 250 gig model, again, although I've highlighted it in my videos when I have done, it perhaps could have been a larger capacity had I had one of those available at the time. So what I'm going to do is head right back into the storage manager here, go back into the M2, and I'm going to reformat this drive, because I think it's important that we get as accurate a test on this as possible. And I do think that score, I've never normally included a retest, but I think for the sake of this SSD, I'm prepared to make an exception, because I feel a bit guilty about it in the past. The other thing I will highlight is I've made a re-review on this SSD that is going to feature on NAS Compares there, and in that I do show you guys how to update the firmware. So the reason I'm saying all this is I just wanted to confirm that I've used Samsung's Magician software to upgrade this SSD to the very latest firmware as well on this 1TB drive. But again, let's go ahead and reformat this drive and see which score we get, just in case that 5500 was anything to do with any of the previous stuff. But again, it's benchmarking it at 5561, so I'm not going to do a third benchmark there. But again, little surprised that this SSD is as low as it is, and I think a lot of you in the comments have reported that this drive has been known to have that low marking there. The last thing I'm going to mention before we go ahead with the testing is that proximity wise, I'm about 60 to 70 centimeters away from the PS5, and you can hear its CD drive spinning up there in the background. So I apologize when we are utilizing some games on disk, which by the way is only used for authentication. All of the data for the games resides on the internals of the system, be it on the internal PS5 SSD, or in the case of the testing on the M.2 SSD, the Samsung 980 Pro. I apologise in advance if that noise in the background does interfere with things as we proceed. But there's our Samsung 980 Pro 1TB model. So let's go ahead and start moving our games over. And again, we're going to be doing two separate videos, just like we've done before. And we're going to be moving over these 8 games. And again, with these 8 games that we're looking at here, I will highlight that 4 of them are going to be today. So these let's move along. We've still got a couple of games to go. There we go. There is our 8 games. In today's video, we are going to be looking at SpiderMan Remastered, Ghosts of Tsushima, Rocket League, and The Last of Us Part 2. We've also got in the video after that Spider-Man, Lego Worlds, Deathloop, and Call of Duty Warzone. But for now, let's move these 8 games over to the internal SSD and talk a little bit about this drive while we do it. So, we're moving this over to the M2, I should say. So, the Samsung 980 Pro was one of the first 7,000 megabytes per second SSDs to arrive in the market. When the PS5 was first launched, it had that M2 upgrade slot, but it took more than half a year before Sony enabled it. Now, there's lots of reasons for this, but one of the biggest reasons was that the SSDs considered higher than 5,500 megabytes per second were by no means ubiquitous at that point. There were barely any in the market, and a lot of people would have rushed out to buy sub-performance SSDs. These are your Phison E16 controllers. These are early NVMe4 controller SSDs. Basically, SSDs with a read performance at sequential, notably lower than the internal 5,500 megabytes per second of the PS5. Now, one of the few SSDs at that time last year, between September and November 2020, that did have the performance was the Samsung 980 Pro. You had your Sabrent Rocket, your WD Black, and this one. Now, this was arguably the favourite of the three. The WD Black series, although heavily targeted by gamers in the past and utilised by a lot of photo video editors, Samsung have really developed this incredible reputation for SSDs in the last 4 or 5 years, and particularly NVMe. They were one of the first to the mark with real high-grade consumer SSDs with the Samsung 960 series. When the 960 was launched, it was kind of the very first commercially available NVMe SSDs that really was pushing out that performance in the 2,000 to 3,000 megabytes per second. Fast forward several iterations all the way through, and here we are at the 980 Pro. Now, another thing to bear in mind is, as this SSD has been around for a year, that is one of the main reasons why we have the kind of creative pricing that we're seeing at the moment, where we're seeing each of the storage tiers from the 250 gig model all the way up to the 2 terabyte dropping in price between 10 to 20%. So with that in mind, a lot of you might be considering this drive for like Black Friday or Prime Day or Cyber Monday or any one of the myriad of sales worldwide. And it's a good SSD, I've got to say, but there are things about it that I think maybe in the last 12 months could have been, revisited. And one of those things they are revisiting is the idea that it was released with no first-party heatsink. It seems incredibly short-sighted of Samsung to release such a popular drive, but then expect users to have to go third-party on their heatsinks. Now, obviously, the likes of WD and Seagate, Sabrent, MSI, I could list off so many SSD brands, all of which supply first-party heatsinks, because these SSDs get super hot. And particularly PS5 owners who want to upgrade their storage, that have only got that small little bay, need to use quite compact heatsinks if they want to utilise just that bay and maintain the plate over the top to make sure regulated internal pressures of the PS5 and the cooling handling internally is done to the benefit of all the components. Now, that heatsink version from Samsung that is arriving at the start of December is not the cheapest, I've got to say it. They have gone quite premium with that price tag. Now, I do think that price will come down, but the reason I'm bringing this whole thing up isn't just because I'm still recommending you get a heatsink, but do not be surprised if the 980 Pro sees significant price drops during Black Friday, because I think Samsung are going to want to capitalise on this heatsink version, so they can't really lower the price on that without lowering the price of the 980, or at least making the heatsink more appealing one way or another. So do not be surprised if 980 Pro, much like it was during Prime Day of this year in 2021, sees some great discounts. But for now, I've been rabbiting all the way through this. Let's fast forward to the completion of the moving of this data. Again, this is fairly normal performance. It should be highlighted that the write speed on the 980 Pro is slightly less than some of the SSDs released in the last 6 to 8 months. They've had a lot more time to work on this architecture, and the likes of the Phison E18 controller and the Integrate Rainer controller have been released in the meantime. But for now, let's fast forward and make our way into game number 1, which is SpiderMan Remastered. Right, so first things first, as we make our way into SpiderMan Remastered, it's worth once again remembering that this is a PS4 title that has been upscaled to PS5. So again, this is stored, as you can see at the bottom right of the screen, on that M.2 SSD, and this is the PS5 upgraded version that was included with Spider-Man Miles Morales Ultimate version. We've got a couple of tests that we're going to run, and we're going to see just how well not only the Samsung 980 Pro loads the instances that we want to run through here and how it compares against the PS5 internal SSD, but also we want to look out for any kind of texture, pop issues or swaps that don't really kick in as quick as we'd like. And what we're going to do is use the same thing we've been doing before, so we're going to go in 3, 2, 1. And on your screen, we should be able to see both gameplays side by side. The internal PS5 SSD on the top left, and me playing the game on the internal M.2 SSD, that Samsung 980 Pro, running there. And what we're trying to do here is move as fast as we can. We're using the game in full graphics mode. Again, we're doing that because we want to make sure the SSD is pushed as hard as we can get it. And the idea is to get us moving through the game as quick as we can, but also occasionally moving out so we can get the game to try to load in some of those textures for us. So again, try not to look at the middle of the screen while I'm doing this. You've got to be looking there at the edges, because that's where the game is probably going to have its biggest difficulty, because it will always focus on the middle. So what we want to do is see how quickly it loads in all of those textures for us. When it comes to people, when it comes to items, but for now, I'm seeing no drop in frame rate there at all. I'm seeing no issues really to speak of. The game is loading a lot of the reflections that we're used to. They're all running fine. And again, we seem to be moving just as well as we'd like to see. And I think for now, what we can do is start making our way into the next half of this test on this game, which is fast traveling. So what we're going to do is make our way into the game. We're going to head to the northernmost point of the map, and we're going to see how quickly the game can load us in on this fast travel. So again, we're comparing it against the load speed of the internal PS5 SSD. So let's go in 3, 2, 1. Should be outlandishly fast, and we want to make sure we move straight away off the bat, not give the SSD any time to breathe. And again, absolutely fine. As I've mentioned in other videos, we have to kind of also factor in that as impressive as this game looks, a lot of these textures are going to be recycled throughout the entire open world map. So maybe a lot of this is already going to be sitting there in the cache nice and easily. But for now, seemingly running fine. Seeing no problems to speak of there. The textures are exactly what I would like to see. And the game seemingly is running absolutely beautifully. So for now, I would say SpiderMan Remastered, completely fine, running at the speed I'd like to see, with everything running as smooth as silk. So let's make our way into the next game, which is Ghosts of Tsushima, and a game I can very rarely pronounce right. Right, so here we are on the desktop of Ghosts of Tsushima, and again, this is the PS5 upgraded version, and today's test we're going to be doing in Legends mode. We've got a couple of missions that we're going to be utilising here, and in these we're going to go first and foremost into the Severed Hearts extra mission here, and again we're going to compare it against the internal PS5 SSD. Textures are less important here, a lot of the lighting effects are, and do take a quick note for during the loading screen when we will see some in-game graphics, and a lot of the time we can see if the PS5 is loading assets quickly. We've noticed this is a game where a lot of the QLC NAND SSD, so this isn't one of those, have shown a little bit of struggle as their IOPS factors have been very, very small. But we're going to make sure we're on offline mode, and we're going to run up the game and start it in 3, 2, 1. Little countdown there. Again, do look out for the internal graphics there at the loading there as the assets are loaded into the game. This isn't an FMV, it is utilising in-game graphics here on screen right now. So you can have a little look and see if any of the AI are walking about. Sometimes that can distinguish between a lot of what's there. As you can see, hopefully you're seeing the same thing, but if you're not, then it's normally an indicator that a lot of the in-game assets aren't being drawn in with quite the same alacrity between different drives. So what we're going to be doing here is just making our way gingerly into the camp. Again, we're not going to worry too much about how things run in terms of the characters here on screen. What we're predominantly looking at here is just how the game looks, particularly the lighting, I think, for this mission. The loading was just as quick as I would have liked to have seen. Absolutely no tardiness there. We're just going to keep very quickly running our way through the map area and just trying to force the game to show off any inconsistencies or loading problems that it may or may not reveal as we carry on. Again, making our way in, continuing. But for now, we can go ahead and keep moving. Again, things seem to be fine. We are going to have to turn around in just a moment as we reach the kind of walls at this mapped area here. But again, still running fine. Absolutely lovely frame rate. Graphics I'm seeing here on screen are running fine. The light effects and the reflections there, all running great still. I think for now, I'd say that's fine as we make our way into a second test. Again, no drop in frame rate, still running a lovely 60 there. And we can carry on and make our way into the second half of this test, which again, we're going to stay within the Legends mode. This time we're going to switch into the survival mode. So in the survival mode, Shores of Vengeance, this is going to be one about introducing as many in-game kind of assets as possible, particularly AI. This is a less graphically demanding area. Definitely lighting effects have no real difficulty here, but a lot of textures, and when we start pushing things, we kind of really shove, because I know a lot of the AI is going to be handled by the internal PS5's GPU and CPU, and the memory of course, but the NVMe has still got to pull a lot of assets consistently while it's keeping all these things in the cache. Let's go in 3, 2, 1. Oh, sorry, let's try that again. 3, 2, 1. Again, we got the countdown. And in this one, again, we're just going to run all the way through the map as quickly as we can before we move on to the game after this one. Again, we're going to see in-game assets being utilised here as the game loads in gradually. Again, normally you see a delay on some of these segments here, or again, whether certain AI or NPCs are walking around in shot is normally an indicator if things are loading fine here. Or sometimes the textures on them, or some of their, like, not so much that one on the left, don't worry too much about that one. But as we go into this game, once again, we're just going to run in lovely and fast and make our way into this map area. So again, much larger, with a huge emphasis on NPCs on this map, large numbers of enemies all over the shop. And again, all we're doing here is making sure we can pull in as many enemies as we possibly can. So we're just going to go for this slightly long route around here while we get lots of enemies following us here as I fall on my arse. And again, carrying on here. These enemies will follow us as we make our way into the next area. It's going to have even more NPCs as we try and pull in as many as we can to see if we can get any of those IOPS issues that are part of some SSDs. Although this SSD does have that kind of 1 million read IOPS rating, which is, you know, incredible. There's only about 6 or 7 SSDs on the market right now in PCIe Gen 4x4 that have that kind of high IOPS rating there. For those that aren't aware, IOPS means input outputs per second, individual input outputs per second, which again corresponds to small files. Whenever you see an SSD vendor talking about its performance, it is more typically focused on something called sequential, which is the big data. IOPS are the little bits of data and how many little bits of data it can handle at once. But at the moment, this is running fine. We've got all of these here on screen. No texture pop there. And again, I'm just going to run up this bank here and then we'll call it a day before we make our way onto our next game, which is Rocket League, the PS4, but with PS4 Pro upscaled extras, I believe. But for now, yep, that's running fine. No textures, no forced load, no, difficulty swapping out high and low textures as we go. So I think for now, let's make our way into our next game, which is of course Rocket League. Cool, making our way into the Rocket League title screen here. Lovely and quick. We're not going to worry about any extra stuff there. And again, This is going to be an offline mode. We're going to go straight into play. We're going to go straight into a custom mode. It's going to be an exhibition. It's going to be the standard 4x4 octagon soccer match here with AI. And again, we're looking at two things. We're looking at how quickly this loads the game, and of course, how quickly and how high it maintains that frame rate. It shouldn't struggle on a game like this, but you would be surprised, as this game has been, updated with lots of DLC. It really is a game as a service for quite a long time. But let's go in 3, 2, 1. And we're just going to let that game load up as quickly as it can, and we'll make our way into it. We'll play it for a couple of minutes just to make sure that we're not going to have any lighting issues, and make sure the game can maintain that frame rate as high as it can. So for now, let's carry on and try and force the game to do everything it would normally do. But again, nice snappy response there. I'm seeing no real issues to contend with. A lot of you may wonder how the hell is he completely missing that ball. Once again, I've mentioned this in other videos, but when I'm doing this, there's a slight delay on capture between my input and what you see on screen. Consequently, it's really easy for me to miss things with that slight delay there, particularly on a game like this. This is not boding well for me and my team, but again, things are moving sharp, exactly what I'd like to see here. Again, I see no problem in what we're kind of seeing here on screen. Everything's lovely and sharp. The visuals are what I'd like to see. But for now, let's come out of this game, because clearly I absolutely suck. And we'll make our way into our last game, which has got a couple of tests, which is The Last of Us Part 2. Okay, so we're on The Last of Us Part 2, and again, we're going to be running two different chapters, both of which have their own very distinct reasons for being selected. We're going to be going to the Channel 13 area and the Tunnels area, with the Tunnels area being considerably more focused on a lot of the high textures that it can't swap out. It's got a few silent loading segments, and the Channel 13 segment, which is a lot more open world. It can't really introduce any silent loading there. There's a few fixed camera stuff. And ultimately, between these two tests, it will challenge these SSDs a lot more. It's a lot more about IOPS this time, more so than sequential data. So let's go into the Tunnels area first. So again, we're going to go with the standard difficulty there. And when we click this up, it's going to be asking us about the difficulty options there. Let's go in and click Start. And now we've got these two running side by side. Now, while we go through this, it's worth highlighting a few things. First and foremost, the PS4 version of Last of Us Part 2 was one of the slowest loading games on that entire system, coming out very late in the system's lifespan. Last of Us Part 2 on the PS5, although loading considerably faster than it did on PS4, it's still quite long. A loading time from a cold boot, or at least a cold title screen load, sometimes taking on the PS4 upwards of a minute to a minute and a half, being lessened to something like 50 seconds to maybe a minute on here. Now, this all comes down to IOPS, but that was incredibly fast there. And again, I secretly kind of suspected it might be quick, given this SSD has like a million IOPS rating, in terms of read IOPS at the very least. But still, that was lovely and fast. That was probably one of the fastest instances of loading that game that I've done so far on this. So again, making our way through this segment there. Forgot to push through with circle. We can keep moving forward. And again, through this area, we can just go ahead. And right now, we've got a lot of close-up textures to contend with here. So again, the game doesn't have a lot of opportunities to introduce low-res textures. But we've already been through two areas of silent loading there where we can't go back the way we came. There's at least one more. But again, the game can't force out a lot of those assets for low textures the way it normally would. And it's kind of forced to get itself to hide a lot of the old stuff to maintain that frame rate and the texture quality and a lot of the facial animations. But for now, it's seemingly running quite well. There's been no dip in frame rate. The lighting effects are still good. The game is still running just as well as I would like it to all the way through this. But for now, let's carry on moving forward. And again, we won't play this section for much longer. All we're looking at here is just how well it's dealing with a lot of the water effects, reflecting off the ground, how well it's dealing with the textures when it's swapping a lot of those different things out. Ultimately, we're seeing just how well it's going to run what we're doing here as it makes its way through the game there. So again, seemingly running well. We can carry on moving forward as we make our way very quickly forward and into the next area as fast as possible while we try to break into that next area there while we're waiting for the AI to assist us. And again, this kind of comes across as something of a loading kind of hidden wall here because we're not being attacked, but ultimately it's still running well as a secret loading there as it introduces and destroys some of those older assets in the distance there. But still running fine, absolutely great on the Samsung 980 Pro. So I think for now we can make our way into the other test area, which is going to be in the studio. And I really hope it can maintain that high loading speed that we just saw. Again, a lot of that comes down to the IOPS performance, because IOPS, let's go for it there, it's starting. It's going to ask us to get rid of that manual save. Do we want to manual save? No, we don't. So let's go in and start it in 3, 2, 1. Oh no, it's going to ask us again in 3, 2, 1. Unbelievable. 3, 2, 1. Right, so as we make our way into the game here, this is an area with a lot of bigger surrounding areas. There's a little bit more, just a little bit more sequential data than there are random. But a lot of this game, as I've mentioned in previous videos, Last of Us Part 2 does a lot of in-world silent loading. Very rarely do you see an actual loading screen. Even between levels, they hide them very well between cutscenes. This game, if you try to load areas direct from title screen, that's one of the few times, like during a fresh boot, if you're not using like Resume or anything, where you really do see the weight of The Last of Us 2 in terms of data. Again, we're not seeing the same lightning fast loading we saw before, but again, we're comparing that internal PS5 SSD and it's very much the same. So it's going to be which one can pass the finishing line first in this larger kind of asset and texture-rich environment that we're moving into here, that we're going to push through very fast on this Samsung 980. Overall, still pretty impressed with it. It's been a couple examples of where I think this SSD may have loaded some things faster than any other 1TB I've tested, at least on that first test of Last of Us there, than any other game. Obviously, I can only see what's going on here with the Samsung test there. You guys have got both of them. But I've looked at a lot of this testing in the post-edit on other SSDs, so I can generally tell when things feel like they're going faster. You know, this second save load has always been a bit slow when compared with other SSDs, but still not too shabby there. We're not seeing any performance drop. We're still running lovely and fast. So again, we're just going to very quickly make our way through this area. We're not going to give the game any time to breathe. It's going to keep moving forward lovely and fast as quick as we can as we make our way along. And again, we're not going to give any time for the game to kind of suddenly realise it has to do more. Again, kind of a mispress there. Pressing X, of course. We have a fixed camera area there where I feel like something's happening there where the game is forcing us to not be able to move the camera too far out as it gets rid of some assets. But for now, let's carry on moving forward as quick as we can. Again, forcing the game into just keeping up with what we're doing as we don't run at a slow pace. Something that I think this game kind of capitalizes on in order to get people to, you know, when they play through the game slow. Like there, as another fixed silent loading area where it's destroying some older assets. It'll allow us to run in just a moment. But again, we're just going to keep pushing forward as fast as we possibly can in order to keep the game running. Slight drop in frame rate there, but I think we can kind of forgive that on this instance. I think a lot of that was more the GPU with that lighting effect as we flicked past real quick. But for now, let's move along this area here as we push forward into the map as quickly as we can. But for now, the world is still looking great. The textures are all still there. And the game is seemingly keeping up with what we are doing. Let's get the light on. There we go. Keep moving forward. And again, lovely, running nice and fast. And I think for now, that tells me this SSD is running exactly how I would like to see it run in the bevy of tests that we've been performing. But for now, let's come out of this and start moving back to the main title screen and to sort of discuss what we've seen. Now, as we've made our way through these games, it has to be said that in all of our tests of these slightly more PS5 heavy titles, or the PS5 upgraded titles, a lot of the SSDs we've seen and the ones that we've tested have been SSDs that have been released in the last 3 to 6 months. This is an SSD that arrived on the scene more than a year ago, at the time of recording at least, and it's still one of the best options out there. Not just in price, of course, but in terms of that sequential read. It does do what it says on the tin, and when we did our full review and hardware overview of this SSD, it did not disappoint a year ago, and it still didn't in our 1 year re-review that hopefully is live by now here on the channel. If you are looking at an SSD for your PS5 upgrade and you want the best value for what you're paying, the Samsung 980 Pro is a solid choice because it's been on the market a year. All the hardware is done in-house with a Samsung controller, Samsung NAND, and everything being made by Samsung, so they control not only the availability, but of course the price point to be a lot more competitive with other SSDs that have arrived recently, where they can't really start mucking around with the price too much. Yes, the sequential write performance of this SSD is a little lower than most, in the 5000s, and if you go for the smaller capacities, even less than that. But writing, as it stands at the moment, is not as much of a priority on PS5 as read, of course. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but for now, a high sequential read and indeed high IOPS are what people should be looking for. And in the case of this SSD, those boxes are solidly ticked and at possibly the best possible price, not only right now, but during the likes of Black Friday, Prime Day and more. So overall, as far as both the tests go and the SSD itself, this is still very much worth your money 1 year on, and I do recommend it. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. We've got another test of this SSD coming very soon, so do stay tuned for that. If you enjoyed this, click like. It helps me understand what I'm doing right in these videos and makes each video better than the last. And of course, click subscribe if you want to learn more about different SSDs and the big face-off coming soon involving this, Firecuda, Sabrent, WD. We have a lot of big comparisons coming before the end of the year, so subscribe if you want to know when they land. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.